views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
On this edition of Today's Verdict, the progressive movement continues in the Bronx and Queens as last night's elections speak for themselves. Our city is changing quickly, and we have three wonderful representatives on today's show to discuss not only the progressive movement, but the issues behind it, including police reform, the eviction moratorium, and the recent decision from the Supreme Court affecting Dreamers. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's Verdict starts right now. I am so happy to have with us New York State Senator Gustavo Rivera from the 33rd District. Gustavo, it's been a little while. First of all, how are you doing today?
I am doing, today is a good day. I can tell you that as through this whole Rona situation, when you ask that question, how you doing, it can be a loaded question. I will tell you that as an introvert, staying inside by myself has never been an issue. Being productive while being inside has been challenging because my TV is right there and my bed is right over there and my fridge is right over there. But in all seriousness, it's been a very challenging time. Still serving my constituency from here, as is the rest of my colleagues and my staff. But today I am doing well.
How are they, and speaking of your constituency, how are they faring? Health wise, the Bronx has been hit pretty hard.
Yes, it has.
Tell me, give us an update.
Well, it's been really tough. When you have a situation like this, it is obvious that people who are poor and working class and who are struggling under the best of circumstances have an even tougher time. We've had a lot of folks who have issues with keeping themselves and their families fed, and we've been very happy to collaborate with a lot of different organizations and private organizations and companies and people who just want to be good to make sure that people are still fed. We have an issue around housing, which is going to explode in the next couple of weeks as the 90 days that were given by the governor to not have any evictions that ended just a few days ago. So we're keeping a very close eye on how housing court is operating now. So it's been really tough. My constituency we are a resilient folk in the Bronx, and that certainly is the truth for people in my district. But I'm still, we're taking it one day at a time and making sure that they are served to the best of our ability. It has been tough, but they're hanging in there.
Listen, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the elections and the progressive movement, and things are just taking off. Last night was it was actually this is one of the reasons why I'm so happy this morning. It is Wednesday morning, and I stayed up until like 1:30 or 2. There were more than a few of the folks that I was looking forward to, that I supported, even to the chagrin of some individuals, like, for example, Jamal Bowman, let me be clear, all the ballots need to be counted. We still have a lot of absentee ballots that are out there, but the trends that we're looking at, in the case of Jamal Bowman potentially beating a 16-term incumbent, it is just wild. I have a friend of mine who defeated an established incumbent in the assembly in Queens, some folks that were not expected to win in the Senate in Brooklyn, some stuff in Westchester. The reality is that we have the energy that was there in 2018 is here in 2020, and that continues on. And listen, as many times as I've been, sometimes, that old Whitesnake song from the 80s, "Here I go again on my own." Many times I have felt kind of, not with a lot of company, but in the last couple of years, I've gotten more and more colleagues that are allies in the progressive movement who are now my colleagues. And I think I'm going to have more of them next year. And I'm very excited about that. Well, you've been doing some great work in the Senate. I want to talk a little bit about some of those bills that you were able to get passed. Yep. The police reform bills. Let's
Listen, the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act, let's talk about a couple of them because they've been so instrumental. Talk to me a little bit about it.
So I think, listen, one of the things that's happened, obviously we have the Rona, and we have the public health crisis that we have been surviving. And then in the middle of it, not anything new, but the tragic death of another Black man in the hands of police, in this case, George Floyd. These two things came together. And so that has meant that there's been a national movement to make sure that we can actually hold police accountable. Because ultimately, this is what this is about. It is about accountability. And so the movement actually has led to us passing a slate of bills. These are just the beginning, but we just talk about a few of them. The one that was very important for us to do was to get rid of something called 50A. That refers to a part of, ironically, in civil rights law. But what it did was it protected disciplinary records of police officers. So if there was a police officer who had committed an act today, and there had been 12 other instances of abuse, we would have never known. And this actually makes that information available through FOIL, by still protecting their privacy, but make sure that in any interaction with the public, we need to know how they acted. As you said, the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act, which makes it a crime to do this. We allow for something called the STAT Act, or Police Statistic and Transparency Act. We actually made sure that you can get the right to record police activity. So we established an affirmative right for people to do so. These are just a slate of bills that we passed. And I should mention that my colleague Jamal Bailey, state senator in the Northeast Bronx, who is the chair of the Codes Committee in the Senate, has been an absolute champion on this. And he has been fighting the good fight, both publicly and privately, to make sure that we get the best bills possible. So listen, these are just the beginning of things that we're doing. There's a bill that I introduced just recently that relates to also accountability on something, not smaller than anti-chokehold, for example. But if police officers cover their badges,
I wanted to ask you about that. It's the ensuing accountability of law enforcement of officers.
Yeah,
and I guess you're referring to, because we see this, often. The police officers that we encounter, their shields are covered. You can't read the number. You don't know who they are. Where is this going? Tell me about it, please.
Well, this is there's a colleague of mine, Harvey Epstein, in the Assembly. We reached out to each other. It was his idea, but I said, Harvey, I gave him a call and I said, Harvey, I'm down with this. Listen, we are all, the police officers are public servants, but unlike myself, I am a public servant as well. Unlike teachers, unlike any other public servant, they have the right, we give them the authority to take away our freedom. That is a big responsibility, and therefore they should be held to an even higher standard than the rest of us. I believe this. So in the case of having your badge and your badge number on there, it means that we can identify the people who need to be held accountable for an act or two or whatever it is they do. And so we've seen that in many instances they cover their number so that they can do things with impunity and think that they're never going to be held accountable. We want to make sure that it is understood that that is part of police misconduct, certainly not as serious as actually either shooting someone or choking someone, but it is serious enough because there's instances that can lead to more serious issues.
Sure.
When somebody is misusing their authority, and we want to make sure that we can identify them. So it's a bill that we introduced recently, and I'm hoping that we can pass it at some point soon.
It's somewhat in tandem with that civil suit against police if there's no recorded activity. In other words, it's supposed to be recording activity. It's another way of police sometimes preventing accountability, and I can see that the two things together really are very, very important for transparency purposes.
They absolutely are.
Well, on the flip side, obviously, I'm sure the police aren't so thrilled. It's been a tough, obviously, couple of months for them. Do you find that there's been a slowdown in their ability to police your neighborhoods? Have they still been accountable? Have they still been going in there? The fireworks, things like that. Are they
I think
still stepping up?
This is not about individual officers who I know many of them. They are good people. They are honorable people. They're accountable people. This is about the institution of the police department. If we have an institution, a structure that is problematic, we need to change that structure. So the resistance that we've seen in certain instances, I have not seen that much of it right now.
You have not.
I have not. I can tell you that there have been some instances where I have seen some slower responses, but it might have been a few weeks ago due to the fact that they were incorrectly sent to a different part of the city. I was very public about the curfew that existed a couple of weeks ago. It was never a good idea. It was the mayor. I criticized him publicly for this. To establish a curfew meant that you had thousands and thousands of police officers trying to corral people who were protesting peacefully, while there were neighborhoods like Burnside Avenue in my district where store owners were getting looted and they couldn't get a response from the police to actually show up. So I have not necessarily seen kind of an organized slowdown, but I can tell you that things like that are going to happen because we're trying to change an institution that is resistant to such change. But ultimately, one point that I want to make really quickly here, we are asking police officers to do too much. Police officers are not social workers. They shouldn't have to deal with homelessness. They shouldn't have to deal with addiction. And yet, because we are not funding the services that actually provide to those folks, they are being asked to do way too much, and we need to change that.
Gustavo, good stuff. As usual, you stay safe. You look great. Next time I see you, it's going to be in the studio. What do you think? Maybe.
Hopefully, like an actual studio and you an actual person.
Be nice.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right, we'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this. All right, we're here with State Senator Brian Kavanagh. Brian's first time to the show. Brian, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
All right, let's get right to it. Evictions. As I told you off camera, I kind of have a little bit of, expertise in this. I was a court attorney, spent a significant amount of time in housing court in the Bronx. It got very crowded, and certainly I'm not a big fan of closed spaces. Attorneys don't have to get all closed in right now because we can work from home. What are your thoughts on the extension of the eviction moratorium?
So we had a moratorium in place that prevented all eviction cases until the 20th, this past Saturday. It's now been lifted. There's a new executive order that's supposed to replace that, but doesn't really constitute a moratorium in eviction cases. So eviction cases have now begun to be filed. The courts are trying to figure out what to do with those. And I and many of my colleagues and many attorneys and tenant advocates feel very strongly that the eviction moratorium needs to be extended for a substantial period. The courts are not prepared to do this in a way that allows tenants to defend their rights to their homes in a way that would be safe either for the individuals or for the general public.
Well, certainly having hundreds of people together in a housing court environment, elevators, courtrooms, hallways, that is a bad recipe for COVID. So we know that.
Right.
But also, I think you would agree, the eviction, which would end up, maybe shelters would also become very dangerous. Wouldn't that also happen?
Yeah, I think the idea that in the middle of a pandemic, we're still in this mode where many people are supposed to be staying home. We're getting into phase 2, and gradually we're going to tell people they can go to their jobs, they can go to other places. But the idea that we're going to be sending marshals to people's homes to put them out on the street in the middle of a pandemic, we go from you must stay in your house to we're forcing you out of your house. It makes no sense in this environment. There will come a time where we need to sort out these cases. We understand, many of us, that landlords also have bills to pay. The lack of an ability to pay rent is a big problem for tenants and for landlords and for the economy in general. I've been working very hard on finding ways to pay the rent going forward. But short term, we need the eviction moratorium to be put back in place for some extended period until we can address this in an appropriate way.
Well, Brian, let's talk about ways to pay the rent. I know you've been working on that. What are some of the possibilities in the future for tenants to get a hold of some money so they can pay their landlords?
Yes, many of us, about 200 of us, legislators and advocates and other elected officials, wrote to Congress a few months back and said, we need about $10 billion. We need about $100 billion nationally and about $10 billion for rental assistance. The House of Representatives has now adopted that position and passed that as part of what they call the HEROES Act. We do need Congress to act. They looks like they're going on recess before the 4th of July soon without doing another stimulus package. They're supposed to be back around July 20th or so. We are hoping that the federal government will realize that paying housing costs has to be an essential component of responding to this crisis. And at the same time, in New York, we first passed a bill that will put $100 million in place that will pay some of the the rent for the lowest income tenants who are the neediest. We've got another bill that we've been working on that's a broader rent relief statute that would be intended to use that federal money and put it in the hands of tenants who need assistance with their rent.
Brian, how are your constituency doing? How are they doing health-wise? Are they rebounding? Are there more still hospitalizations going on? What do you hear?
Yeah, it's still a very tough situation. I mean, we're seeing levels of, we're still seeing, like, New York has done a remarkable job of containing this. We're still seeing levels of illness and hospitalizations in New York that would be troubling in normal times. Obviously, there are a huge improvement over where we were a few months ago, a couple even more recently than that. But we need to make sure people stay vigilant. Many people have yet to be infected and are still vulnerable. We need to make sure people are distancing and wearing masks. I have many people who are still, basically afraid to come back out because they've got some underlying condition, or because they live with somebody with one of those conditions, or just somebody who is older and might be more vulnerable. So we need to continue to be careful. We still have many people who are relying on food deliveries and pantries and meals served to them every day, hundreds and hundreds of people at different sites. So this is still really a crisis in many respects. At the same time, I represent some of the areas that are big nightlife destinations on the Lower East Side. And, I live on Avenue C and 2nd Street and walk through these neighborhoods. And, I think a lot of people there's a lot of exuberance. Finally, we can get out and we can have a meal at a table. People have to be careful. And that messaging I think New Yorkers are doing better than people in many other places from what I've seen, but we need to continue to be really careful about that across the city and across the state.
So I've stayed in Manhattan. My family didn't leave. And, I actually walked with protesters, walked down there, ended up at Trump and everything. What was it like downtown during a lot of the protests and things? Have things settled down a little bit, or there's still a little bit of a fight to keep this going?
I think the protests continue. My district includes City Hall. There is presently a 24-hour sleep-in protest on a lawn just east of City Hall. There was a larger group marched across the bridge one came across the bridge from Brooklyn, and the other came down Center Street, and they gathered there yesterday for a big rally. There's still a lot of concern. I think a lot of it now is targeting the city budget process, which of course is winding down now, or maybe gearing up. I don't know what the metaphor for that is, but they're due to have a budget very soon. I think obviously we passed a really, extraordinary and thorough package of police accountability legislation in Albany, but we all understand there's still a lot more work to do, both legislatively and in terms of making sure these things get implemented.
Certainly interesting times, and may you live in interesting times, they say. Final thoughts. Where do you think we'll be in a couple of months from now? Because come September, I'm hoping my kid hopefully gets back to school. He's not homeschooling. Yeah. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
It is very hard to predict. I think to the extent that we are going to be able to continue to move toward being more open and people being able to move more freely, it is going to depend on the extent to which people are being careful. Someone said recently, COVID-19 doesn't care whether you're tired of COVID-19. And, we're all a little tired. We're worn out. We want to get back to normal, but we need to try to do the normal things we need to do in our lives and, get our businesses going and get out there. But at the same time, be very careful. And to the extent that we can keep infection rates down and we can keep people safe, we might be able to resume lots of things. I think schools for September are a big open question right now. And that's, I know, for a lot of parents and a lot of students, there's a great deal of desire to get back to that, but that's, obviously an enormous kind of aggregation of people from every household in one place. So it's a tricky question. We're going to have to do it carefully. We're continuing to monitor the situation. We've had, public forums for people in our district about these issues, and we're continuing to work on it. And on housing, I think that is one of these areas where we really haven't had a good solution yet, but I am hoping that by the time the summer is over, we have a real answer on that.
All right, Brian. Well, good stuff. Hopefully the next time we see you, we'll actually be in studio. Who knows? We'll cross our fingers. And again, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. I look forward to that.
My pleasure. All right, we'll be back with more Today's Verdict. Stay with us right after this. We're here with Catalina Cruz, Assembly member of the 39th District. Catalina, thanks for coming back.
Thank you for having me, David.
That's always a pleasure. First of all, let's first and foremost, big election last night. throughout New York City. Certainly the progressive movement is continuing. What are your thoughts?
Many of us have these fantastic margins, but I want to make sure that every vote is counted. I want to make sure that every voice is heard. And I don't think we can say that effectively until we know that the absentee ballots have been counted, because we push for so long to be able to have absentee ballots during this time that we got to make sure those voices are heard. So preliminarily, I would say that what we saw was that in spite of COVID, people want to exercise their right to vote, and many of them went out and voted, and many of them mailed in their ballot. And yes, we saw the progressives take a gigantic lead, and for many of us, continue the lead that we've had for a long time. And so that's very rewarding. But I'm conservative in that nature, that until the Board of Elections certifies that piece of paper, we don't say we won.
I completely understood. All right, so this is I love this quote over here. Well, I'm going to read it. It's not a quote. You are the first former Dreamer to be elected to the New York State Assembly, correct?
That's correct, and actually the first one to be elected in the state of New York, and third one in the country.
So therefore, the DACA decision must have been especially joyful for you to read, or at least to get your hands around.
I mean, it was. I am from that era right before there was even any DACA. For many of us, there was no possibility of even imagining that it could be a reality. I became one of the lucky ones. I was able to regularize my status, and always felt that it should not be about luck, that we should have a clear path to citizenship, not just for the Dreamers, but for their family members, for the original Dreamers, our parents. So when President Obama announced DACA, it felt like this gigantic weight lifted off many of our friends' backs, except that we knew that it was temporary, that somebody could come along and do exactly what the president did, which was promise to take it away, attempt to take it away. But I'm very happy to see the Supreme Court make the decision they made, not only as someone who grew up as a Dreamer, but as a lawyer, to see that our system isn't completely letting us down.
I think you and I were talking a little bit about the decision. It's a heavy decision. It's a long read.
It is.
It's a law school read. But certainly it's nice to see that the justices, have their pulse on the nation, and they understand that. And I think it was a really important decision. I think it's one that's going to go down with respect to the legacy of the Supreme Court. Do you think it's going to continue with respect to, the immigration movement, and the fact that we are hopefully allowing those to come into the country, stay in the country, become citizens? What are your thoughts on the long-term ramifications of a decision like this?
Look, I think what the decision has shown us is that for a very long time, we saw the Supreme Court as this entity where everything was based on legal precedent, where every decision was based on some sort of legalese, or not necessarily on the humanity of who we are. In this particular decision, based its findings, a lot of it was on whether taking DACA away was capricious, whether it was a malicious act by the president. And I think what we're going to start seeing is a little bit more of that. Yes, the legal analysis of whether something should have happened or not, but the understanding that our humanity isn't just based on laws, that our humanity goes beyond that, understanding that sometimes our laws cannot provide for the real human needs of our community, and the morality of what was about to happen to so many young people. The Supreme Court recognized that. And so I don't know that it would extend to other decisions related to immigration. I do think that this is going to push Congress to act, and it should. And it should push people to come out and vote in November, and to vote someone in who isn't going to put us in a predicament like this, where we have to choose whether we treat someone humanely simply because they came to this country as children without a piece of paper. And, if Congress really wants to be pro-immigrant like they claim, then let's get this done. Let's get this person out of the White House. Let's get the laws changed, because otherwise it's just empty promises like before.
Since the last time we spoke, there's been protesters. It's been slowing down a little bit, the Black Lives Matter, and certainly there's been bills that have been passed up in New York State with respect to police holding the police accountable. What are your thoughts on the movement and the response with respect to the assembly? What are your initial thoughts on that?
I'd like to think that the things aren't just going to dissipate and that people aren't just going to go away and think that we've all of a sudden solved police brutality because we did away with 58. 58 was a big piece of it, but it's not enough. There's so much more work that needs to be done. Repealing something that didn't allow us to have the clarity or the information we needed to assess whether an officer was a good officer or not is the basic thing that we needed. Now is where the real hard work comes. Who gets what money? Do we take away money from our police state, which is what I would prefer to do and what I'm going to be pushing to do, because I'd much rather invest that money in education and in diversion programs. And so that is now where we are. And unless we continue to hold electeds accountable, what's going to happen is that the movement, you're right, things are going to start to slow down, and all of a sudden we don't have this pressure anymore and people just go back to normal. And I don't want to see that happen. I continue to see people push.
I had State Senator Gustavo on, Rivera, not within 15 minutes of a discussion we were talking about. Do you believe the police now are going to not come into the community as much? Are they not going to respond as quickly? What are your thoughts on that? Do you think the police are a little bit hesitant now to respond to the fireworks or issues like that? Or do you feel that they're still going to be strong enough to get in there and respond to the calls we need?
Look, I can't speak for them. I'd like to think that they didn't get into this job with the idea of having unfettered power. I would like to think that the majority of officers who got into this job did it because they knew that there could be of service to our community. What has happened is that over the last few decades, we've turned the idea of an officer into this ever powerful figure who should not be held accountable. And frankly, that should have never happened. And so I guess only time will tell, but I'd like to think that officers won't do that because they know that their job is to serve the community.
Okay, final thoughts. We don't have too much time left. Your constituents, how are they doing? Do they seem to be, just rebounding a little bit in terms of the COVID and the health? What are your final thoughts?
I think so. I see lots of more businesses opening, people going back to work. Our food line is decreasing a little bit. So I'd like to think that people are getting back on their feet. But it's still a lot of work to be done. Too many people still don't have healthcare. Too many people are facing evictions because if they didn't have money to pay 3 months worth of rent yesterday, they're not going to have 3 months of rent to pay for the next 3 months. So
it's just a cycle, just keeps on going. All right. Well, anyway, I want to thank you, Assemblymember Catalina Cruz from the 39th District. Always a friend to the show. We'll see you in the next month or two, whether it's in the station or back at home.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back with more of Today's Verdict. Stay with us right after this. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you have any questions about today's show, or would like to see a future topic discussed, please email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. From all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your issues, learn the law, reach a verdict with us. We'll see you next time.